Toxic habits I was raised with that I will not be passing on to my children. Part 1. Growing up, I had such a wonderful mother, and she was my best friend until she passed away in 2016. But she wasn't perfect, and a lot of her trauma was passed on to me. I've since forgiven her for all of that, of course, but in the process of healing, I picked up on a lot of her toxic behaviors. Like, for instance, apologizing. My mother rarely apologized to me, even if I was right. Instead of talking about things, she would walk away angry and then reappear hours later happy as if nothing had ever happened, even if I was clearly upset. I grew up thinking this was normal behavior, and it was so hard to unlearn as an adult. Just ask my husband. But I refuse to pass this along to my children. So now I'm always the first to apologize and hear my children out when they need to talk. Toxic habits I was raised with that I will not be passing on to my children. Part 2. The good old respect your elders mentality. I was taught this from a very young age. That I was to be kind and respectful towards anyone older than me, even if they made me uncomfortable or were not kind to me in return. And while this alone isn't the most toxic thing in the world, the fact that I was instructed to be kind and respectful to those who clearly disliked me, those who would ignore my very existence, and even those who physically abused me, that is toxic. Growing up with this mentality was part of what led me into a very abusive first marriage that I thankfully escaped from. It took going through therapy and realizing that even though I was young, I deserved to be respected too, because I wasn't taught that. So rather than respect your elders, we should respect everyone until we have a reason not to. Toxic habits I was raised with that I will not be passing on to my children. Part 3. Growing up, I remember feeling as though while I lived in my body, it was never truly my own, and my opinions didn't matter. My first memory of feeling this way? Being tickled at around 5 years old. While I loved to play with family members, I distinctly remember being tickled to the point where I couldn't breathe, and the tickles were no longer fun. It really felt more like I was being hurt. I remember yelling out, "Please stop tickling me, I don't like this." But the uncontrollable laughter from me made the person think otherwise, and they wouldn't stop. As I grew older, this lack of bodily autonomy became more clear to me with comments like, "Go give your cousin a hug," or "Make sure you give them a kiss before they leave." And back then I couldn't say no. But since then I found my voice, and I'm passing the knowledge of bodily autonomy on to my kids. Toxic habits I was raised with that I will not be passing on to my children. Part 4. I remember when I turned 17 years old. I remember because it was as if a switch had flipped in my family. From the day I turned 17, I was frequently shut down, reminded that I was not an adult yet, and that my opinions didn't matter. The goals that I had set for my future? Unattainable. My plans for school? Unrealistic. And I could forget about pursuing my dream to become a photographer, because that was laughable to my family. Spoiler alert, I've been a professional photographer for almost 8 years now. It was just so odd to me that right as I began to spread my wings, I was shut down and scolded like a young child all over again. I eventually broke away from the plans they had set in place for me, but I carried around so much guilt for years. And no one should have to carry that burden around. Toxic habits I was raised with that I will not be passing on to my children. Part 6. Mental health. Let's talk about it. I dealt with a lot of trauma when I was younger, and with that trauma came a lot of mental illnesses that I suffered with for as long as I can remember. My first memories from when I was around 3 or 4 years old are riddled with panic and intrusive thoughts. And those thoughts were relentless all throughout my childhood. When I got a little bit older, my mental illnesses took complete control over my life. I was washing my hands 50 times a day until they were bleeding, and I refused to eat due to my phobia of germs and illness. Panic attacks were daily at this point, but instead of being taken seriously about my issues, I was scolded. My family didn't understand, and they acted as though I made the choice to feel the way that I did. Therapy completely changed my life. And if it taught me anything, it's that we have to start taking our children seriously when they say something is wrong. Start that conversation early. Toxic habits I was raised with that I will not be passing on to my children. Part 7. For as long as I can remember, I was always labeled by my parents as the bad kid. They loved to tell everyone how much I misbehaved and how much I fought them. I heard it every single day of my life, and as I grew up, it became my identity. I was constantly told, "I hope you have a little Melissa when you grow up." And "I hope your child treats you as horribly as you treat me every single day." Their comments destroyed me. And sure, I acted out. I definitely did. But it's not because I was a bad kid. It's because they had conditioned me to think that I was nothing more than a bad kid. I mean, that's all I was told my entire childhood. Like always, I talk too much and I can't fit it all in 1 minute. Like and follow for part 2, I'll have it out super soon. Toxic habits I was raised with that I will not be passing on to my children. Part 7 continued. If you haven't seen part 1, be sure to check that out first. As I grew up, I began to fit my parents' narrative more and more. Because at that point, I truly believed that I was a worthless, bad child, and nothing more than wasted time and wasted space. And my teenage years were a disaster. But I'll go into more detail on that another time. My point here is that as I've grown older and I've had my own children, I've worked so hard to heal myself. And you know what? Children are not inherently bad. And no, my almost 10-year-old daughter is not a little Melissa. Because little Melissa wasn't bad either. She just wasn't loved the way she should have been.